My sister and her family moved into my house without my permission, so my prankster friend got rid of them in 5 minutes. Growing up, my sister and I were close, but once she got married, things changed between us. Now, what happened recently is something I'll never forget. My name's Emma, and I'm 31 years old. I own a modest 3-bedroom house. It's nothing extravagant, but it's all mine, something I've worked hard to pay off over the past decade. Sure, I sometimes envy friends who live in fancier downtown apartments, but then I remind myself, I have no landlord to answer to, no roommates leaving messes. It's just me and my space. Let me introduce my sister, Haley. She's 38, married to Max, her high school sweetheart, and they have 2 kids. We used to be inseparable, but after she got married, her priorities shifted. I understood. She was building her own life. Over time, we drifted, though we still kept things friendly, or so I thought. Haley and Max are free spirits. They're always talking about leaving the rat race and living life to its fullest. It's something I'd hear every family gathering. Life's too short to be chained to a job, Emma, she'd say, raising her glass. Max would back her up. Think of the memories, the adventures. But I just think to myself, memories don't pay the mortgage. I tried advising them to be more cautious with money, especially with 2 kids to care for, but my concerns fell on deaf ears. They jet off on last-minute trips or splurge on the latest gadgets as if budgeting wasn't a thing. And then a few months ago, they went all in. They sold their house during the market boom, planning to use the profit to fund a year of traveling the world. I remember Haley's excitement on the phone. Emma, we're doing it. We sold the house. I nearly choked on my coffee. What about the kids? Your jobs? She laughed. We'll homeschool on the road. It's an education too, and we can always work later. This is our chance to live. I was worried and tried reasoning with her. Haley, travel is expensive, especially with kids. What happens when the money runs out? But she just brushed me off with a casual, we'll figure it out. Things didn't go as planned. At first, they posted glamorous photos from their travels, fancy restaurants, hotels. Living the dream, every caption read. But then after a couple of months, those posts slowed. The last one was a grainy picture of them camping in a field, talking about embracing the simple life. Weeks passed in radio silence. I assumed they were just caught up in their travels, not knowing the reality they were facing. Then, one evening after a long day of work, I came home expecting peace and quiet, only to find a mess in my entryway. Strangers' shoes, kid-sized backpacks, and muffled voices. I stepped into the living room, and there they were, Haley, Max, and their 2 kids unpacking right in my space. Haley, I blurted, completely taken aback. What are you doing here? She turned, smiling. Surprise! We're back. I stood there in shock. Back at my house? Max walked over, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Yeah, we decided to cut the trip short. Turns out, full-time travel with kids is harder than we expected. Haley chimed in. Mom gave us your spare key, the one you left for emergencies. I knew you wouldn't mind us crashing here while we get back on our feet. It'll only be for a few months. A few months? I stammered. You didn't think to ask me first? Haley just stared at me, looking hurt. But we're family, Emma. I thought you'd be glad to help us. Max stepped in, his tone smug. Come on, Emma. Family helps each other. It's not like you're using all this space anyway. I felt my anger rise. Where did this entitlement come from? You need to leave, I said firmly. Now. But Haley refused. And then Max, towering over me, tried to intimidate me. Don't make this difficult, Emma. We don't have anywhere else to go. My mind was racing. Calling the cops crossed my mind, but I didn't want to put their kids through that. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stormed into my bedroom and locked the door. I was on the edge of tears, feeling utterly trapped. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben, an old friend from college. Hey Emma, I'm in town for work. Drinks tonight? Max was always the prankster in our friend group, the one with a wild imagination and schemes that seemed to come out of nowhere. If anyone could help me get through this mess, it would be him. Without wasting time, I quickly sent him a text. Actually, can you come over? I've got a situation and could really use your help. Bring your acting skills. An hour later, the doorbell rang, and I sprinted to answer it before Haley or Max could get there. But when I opened the door, I saw a police officer on my doorstep. "Oh my God, Max," I whispered, looking at him in shock. He was standing there, looking as serious as ever, in a perfect police uniform. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and grinned. "You came prepared. I seriously need your help getting rid of my sister and her family. They've totally taken over my house." He looked at me and nodded as I quickly explained the whole situation. Max listened, and without missing a beat, agreed to help with his best performance yet. I went back inside, cleared my throat, and called out, "Haley, Ben, could you come here? A police officer needs to speak with us." Haley and Ben walked into the hallway with big smiles, but those faded the moment they saw Max standing there in uniform. "Good evening," Max greeted them, voice steady. "I'm Officer Johnson. We've had a report of a break-in at this address. Care to explain what's going on here?" Ben's face immediately hardened, and he looked from me to Max, as if trying to read the situation. Finally, he cleared his throat and puffed out his chest, moving toward Max. "There's no break-in here, officer," he said in a low, steady voice. "We're family. Everything's fine." I took my chance to step in. "Actually, officer," I said, "these people entered my home without permission. I never gave them access." Max turned to Haley and Ben, his gaze piercing. "And how exactly did you enter this residence?" Haley fumbled with her words before answering. We used a key. Our mom gave it to us. She had it as an emergency spare. But without permission from the homeowner," I added. "So, technically you broke in. Who knows what might be missing?" Max nodded thoughtfully, looking around as if he were seriously considering my words. "When the homeowner requested that you leave, did you comply?" Ben shifted uncomfortably and stammered, "Well, But Max cut him off, pulling out a pair of handcuffs with a serious expression. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave immediately. Failing to do so could lead to charges of breaking and entering, as well as trespassing." It took everything in me to hold back laughter as I watched Haley and Ben panic. "We're really sorry," Haley finally blurted, clearly rattled. "We'll pack up." Max's final words sealed the deal. "If you leave right now," he said, "I won't file any charges. But you'll return the key and stay off the property." They didn't need any further encouragement. Max and I watched quietly as they scrambled to grab their kids and bags, rushing out the door as if the house were on fire. The moment their car pulled away, I burst into laughter, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Max, you're a lifesaver," I said, shaking my head, still amazed at his act. "Coffee?" "Sure," he replied, stepping inside and closing the door. I quickly brewed 2 cups, and we settled down in the quiet, now empty living room. "I can't believe they just assumed they could live here," Max said, looking around. "I know," I sighed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Part of me feels guilty, they're family after all, but I just couldn't let them take over my space. Max put his coffee down and looked at me. "You did the right thing, Emma. Just because they're family doesn't mean they can bulldoze over your boundaries. They made their choices, and it's not on you to pick up the pieces." I nodded, grateful for his reassurance. I couldn't help but wonder, though, if standing up for myself like this would cause irreparable damage to my relationship with Haley. But then I looked around my house, remembering all the sacrifices and hard work that had made this place mine. I had every right to protect it. As we sat in the quiet of my now peaceful home, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes it's okay to put yourself first, to set boundaries, even if it's with family. Now on to the next story, story 2. My wife is demanding I stop giving money to my ex. It started with my wife asking me to stop giving money to my ex. Just to clarify, the money I provide is purely for my kids, 11, 13, and 16. We don't follow a rigid child support arrangement, but have our own system. My ex and I agreed on a flexible approach where, at the end of each month, we meet to discuss upcoming expenses. Things like rent, food, school fees, health insurance, and activities for the kids. We've documented this arrangement legally. Some months, the expenses are higher, other months, they're lower. I also keep some emergency funds aside, like when my ex broke her leg and couldn't work, or when she had to take the kids to her mom's funeral and they couldn't afford the travel expenses. My ex has also helped me when I've been in need. When my car was totaled by some joyriding kids, she let me use hers until I found a new one. During the pandemic, when my wife and I had to quarantine with COVID, my ex did our shopping and even cooked meals for us. We've built a supportive co-parenting relationship, and I'm not willing to change that because it works for us. And most importantly, it works for our kids. Now, my wife has 2 kids, 16 and 18, from a previous relationship, but her situation with their father is very different. They can't be in the same room without fighting, and neither of them is willing to compromise for the sake of their children. Early in our relationship, she tried to involve me in the situation, but I made it clear I wouldn't be taking sides. Her kids love their dad, and I didn't want to create animosity with someone I hardly knew. Over time, I've come to realize he's a good guy. Trouble started earlier this year when my wife's ex lost his job. Though he's working again, he makes less than before, leading to a reduction in his child support payments, and they were cut further when the oldest turned 18. I've never asked about the support her ex provided or how she used it. It didn't seem relevant, just as my arrangement with my ex isn't her concern. As long as her kids were taken care of and she didn't ask me to cover extra expenses, I didn't pry. But now, she says she doesn't have enough money for things like getting her hair done, spa days, insurance, or putting gas in her car, and she wants me to help cover these costs. My income is budgeted tightly. Each dollar has its place. I cover my kids' needs, mortgage, bills, insurance, food, and other essentials. By month's end, not much remains, and my wife's request to cut back on what I give my ex is something I can't agree to. The question I keep asking myself is, where's her money going? She works part-time, still receives support for 1 child, and rarely contributes financially at home, save for the occasional takeout meal. So, what's draining her income? These financial disagreements have been escalating for months. In my mind, reducing the money I give my ex is essentially reducing what I give my kids. My wife used to have a solid bond with them, but now she treats them like they're barriers to the financial support she thinks she deserves. I've told her time and again, I won't cut back on my kids' expenses just so she can spend on non-essentials. The last argument we had, she said my attitude needed to change, that I should start putting her first, or she'd reconsider staying married to me. In anger, I told her to go ahead and call her lawyer right after moving out. Did I handle that wrong? Am I really in the wrong here? Edit addressing common questions from the comments. Before our marriage, we agreed to keep our finances separate. We discussed her contributing to the mortgage but decided against it because first, it's my house, and second, if anything happens to me, it goes to my kids. We made these arrangements clear through a prenup. Before we married, my wife was financially independent. She had her own business, income, and assets, which she wanted to protect for her and her children. This arrangement is why I never felt the need to question her finances. She didn't keep tabs on mine, so I didn't monitor hers. Pre-pandemic, she did contribute financially to our home, but her business couldn't survive COVID shutdowns. Once she got a part-time job, I continued covering the household expenses since her work wasn't full-time. Another clarification, I'm not saying she uses child support for luxuries, but she wants extra money for these things, and I'm not clear on how her income is currently allocated. I'd like to believe she's using her money for her kids, and if that's the case, she could simply communicate that to me. If I understood why she needed help, I'd be willing to support her. Regarding my kids, I want them to live comfortably, eat healthy food, have a decent home, and access activities and healthcare. To make sure they get all of that, I help cover the costs of my ex's rent, so they're in a safe neighborhood, and I give her money for nutritious groceries, so my kids don't rely on convenience foods. My ex doesn't have to work herself to exhaustion just to get by, which would impact my kids negatively. This way, they live well and eat well, which matters to me. I apply this same care to my stepkids, providing them with a stable home, wholesome food, and treats now and then. I'll add, too, that my ex and I get along well as co-parents. Sometimes relationships work better this way. Some people make better friends than partners. As for my wife, she knew about this arrangement before we married, and at the time, she admired it. Now on to the next story. Story 3. My girlfriend's best friend ruined our relationship. Back in 2022, I was in a relationship with a girl named Amy. We were really close, but there was always one issue that nagged at me: her male best friend. I'd never been comfortable with the whole male best friend dynamic, and Amy, unfortunately, seemed to listen to him more than she listened to me. Naturally, I'm a bit possessive, so I brought it up to her a few times, hoping she'd understand. But she just couldn't see where I was coming from. Then one day, things completely unraveled. Her best friend accused me of cheating on her with another girl, a claim that was completely false. Amy was furious and called me, throwing accusations without giving me a chance to explain. I was stunned. At the time of this supposed cheating, I'd been out with my family at a dinner. I even had pictures to back it up. I offered to show her the proof, but she wasn't interested. Before I could defend myself, she blocked me everywhere. Thanks to her so-called best friend, our relationship ended abruptly. But I wasn't just going to accept being blamed for something I hadn't done. I couldn't reach her directly anymore, but I knew her home address. So, I decided to send her a letter with photos and screenshots from that night, proving I was with my family. After sending the letter, a mutual friend who knew both Amy and me called with shocking news. Amy was now dating her male best friend. Hearing that crushed me. We'd been together for 8 months, yet she'd trusted his word over mine without a second thought. But there wasn't much I could do. I was blocked, and our relationship was officially over. But things took an unexpected turn. Amy received my letter and immediately tried to reach out, calling and messaging constantly. I ignored every attempt. She even showed up at college, practically begging me to talk to her. She cried, apologized, and admitted she'd made a huge mistake. She asked me to take her back. Even though I still had feelings for her, I told her I couldn't be with someone who didn't trust me, who'd chosen to believe someone else's lies over my word. After that, I walked away. The next day, I saw her in the college cafeteria, and guess who else showed up? Her male best friend, the very guy who'd wrecked everything. He was there, pleading for her forgiveness. But what happened next was priceless. Right there in front of everyone, Amy slapped him. The sound echoed, and his face turned bright red. It was one of the most satisfying moments I'd ever witnessed. Amy suffered too, though, and I recognized that she'd been misled. So, I decided to remain friends with her. We're still close, and she trusts me more now than ever. I've even heard through friends that she still has feelings for me, which has left me wondering about what to do. Now, here's the kicker. I want to thank everyone who gave their honest opinions. Your support meant more than what I got from most of my friends. Let's continue from where we left off in my last post. In case you missed it, my ex-girlfriend Amy initially believed her best friend, Kenny, who accused me of cheating. She later realized her mistake and came back to apologize, though she hasn't dated anyone since. Some of you suggested giving her another chance, while others told me to walk away and not look back. LOL. Here's what happened next. I confronted Kenny about everything. He admitted that after Amy left me, they got together and were intimate multiple times within just 3 days. But Amy had told me they hadn't done anything more than kiss. So, that was lie number 1. At this point, I felt like more things weren't adding up. Since Amy was supposedly in her home country, I decided to call her mom, figuring she might clear things up since our families know each other well. That's when things took a turn. Her mom told me, yes, they were in her home country, but Amy wasn't there. She'd actually gone to Paris with some friends. I was stunned. Amy had been lying to me all along. And there was more. Kenny also mentioned that during our relationship, Amy had been unfaithful with multiple guys, something I'd never suspected. Now, I don't entirely trust Kenny's words, but the Paris trip story from her mom confirmed that Amy wasn't honest with me. Since then, Amy hasn't responded to my texts or calls. She claimed she was back home because of a family emergency, but that was clearly a lie. I'm now convinced she was unfaithful throughout our relationship. She'd even told me she hadn't dated anyone else in the last 2 years, which now seems like just another lie. So, I've made up my mind. It's time to move on and find someone who's actually honest and trustworthy. But when Amy returns, I'm definitely going to confront her about all of this, and I'll keep you all posted on how that goes.